good afternoon. Happy Monday, as promised. I'm here, guys, to show you how to make the pizza dough that we're going to be using to create our Strombolis tomorrow. This is the same exact dough that I used last Friday on our live demonstration where we made Stromboli, we made pizza, we made calzone. All right? So I've gone ahead and got all of the mise en place ready that we need to do this so we can get right to it. All right? So I'm going to show you in over here, bring the camera over close, show you all the ingredients. We're going to get the dough mixing, and then we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the ingredients that we're using. So we have 6 cups of warm water, okay? Warm water. Yeast likes to operate in a kind of like warm and fuzzy environment. 75, 80 degrees, all right, is where yeast is happy. We have 15 cups of high gluten flour. We have 6 tablespoons of yeast over here. We have 3/4 of a cup of olive oil. We have 6 tablespoons of kosher salt, and we have a 1/4 cup of sugar. So I got my friend giant mixing bowl here, all right? Giant mixing bowl is what we would call a 30-quart mixer. All right, 30 quarts is that's the volume that its max capacity it can hold is. Whereas our KitchenAids or 6-quart mixers, this is 5 times the size, which means it has 5 times the amount it can hold and 5 times the strength to move all that weight and product around, okay? And we're going to be using the giant hook today, matey. The type of yeast that we're using for this is a product that's called SAF instant yeast, all right? It's a type of commercial baker's yeast that doesn't need moisture to be dissolved. It goes in with the flour and all the other ingredients. In fact, you don't want it to go on with the water. So the yeast is actually going to be the last thing we put in here as opposed to using dry active yeast, all right? Or even a cake fresh yeast, which is an entirely different product that most consumers never see. It's also called compressed yeast, or in some circles, a style of brewer's yeast. They got Sorry Miss Jackson on right now as an apology to Lamar Jackson's mom for the Ravens getting beat by the Bills yesterday. Gonna lie, I'm kind of happy for the Buffalo Bills. As a lifelong Patriots fan, I suffered through their reign of the 80s and 90s where they kicked our butts all the time. Then we kicked theirs for 25 years, so go Bills. Bills Mafia. Water's going to go in first. Make sure it all gets in there. Sugar. Olive oil. Salt. Our flour. And lastly, our yeast. All right, so this mixer over here has its controls on this side. The bowl is on, the attachment's hooked. We're gonna raise this thing right up. We're gonna set it on speed 1 to start. We're gonna set our timer here for 2 minutes. And we're just gonna allow the dough to come together, or what we would call hydrate. All right, by hydrate, we need to allow the water to absorb all the flour, all the sugar, all the salt, all the yeast. All right, and that just doesn't happen instantly. We need to let it come together, let it slowly develop, and then we are going to mix it on a higher speed where the dough itself is actually going to develop. And we'll explain more about that in a few minutes. Now, this is really just a super speed lesson here because I'm hoping that you watch this tonight after I edit it and post it on a Google Classroom before we have class tomorrow. Utilize your flex period. Utilize the flex period. Watch during flex, all right? Show it to your friends. So we're going to do this really quick, but I wanted to talk a little bit about different types of flour. Today, we're using a high gluten flour, all right? And you may say, high gluten, what's that mean? What high gluten means is it has a lot of gluten in it, all right? If you ever go to the grocery store and you look at the shelf where all the flour is, if you look hard enough, you'll notice that they're not all the same. All right, there's many different types of flour. Most consumers use a type of flour that's called all-purpose flour. All right, in all-purpose flour, I guess it may be all-purpose, but in the professional world, we almost never use that. We use a very specific flour that aligns to the specific outcome we're looking for in our product. All right? Today we're making pizza dough for Strombolis. We want a finished product that's got a nice firm texture, it has some crisp and crunch to it, and it's kind of got a little oomph to it, like you expect out of a pizza dough or a bagel or something along that lines, or like a really kind of like crisp, crunchy bread that you get from Polish Princess Bakery in Lancaster. What we don't want is something that's super, super ultra tender, like a cake or like a muffin or like a scone. All right. We use a different type of flour for those. All right. All flours have what's called a percentage of gluten or a percentage of protein. Okay. The higher the gluten, the more protein in the flour. The lower the gluten, the less protein in the flour, and then there's actually more starch in the flour. All right? When we bake bread with yeast, not quick breads, but yeast breads, if we were to make pizza dough, dinner rolls, a loaf of bread, homemade bagels, anything of that such, we almost never sift the flour, ever. We don't need to, because that flour that we use for those items doesn't have clumps and lumps in it. But you almost always sift flour when you're making cake batter or cupcakes or pastries or whoopie pies or scones or muffins. All right, we always sift that flour. All right, it has nothing to do with adding volume to the flour. It has everything to do with making sure that all the lumps are taken out so everything incorporates evenly. So over here we have high gluten flour. High gluten flour has between 13.5 and 14.5% protein. All right, that's the top of the mark, unless you're going into like super ultra specialty flours that certain international cultures use. All right, like Vital gluten flour is like 60%, but you hardly ever see that being used. All right, over here we have bread flour. Bread flour is kind of, if there's any flour that is quote unquote all purpose, it's bread flour. Okay, 11 to 12.5% gluten. And then we have pastry flour over here. All right, back up the truck. Bread flour, your standard loaf of bread, your standard dinner roll, some cookies, probably the most widely used flour. Then over here we have pastry flour. We use that for, more tender sweets, something that we want it to be, still have structure to it, but not be like chewy like a bread. All right, so think of your more tender cookies and your more tender muffins and your more tender, fine French pastries if you've ever been to a fancy pastry shop. And then over here we have cake flour, which is 6 to 8% protein or gluten. All right, so this one here, the cake flour, is our most tender and of the flours. All right, cake flour, if we were to substitute cake flour in this dough, it would never, ever, ever work. Okay, just like if we tried to use this high gluten flour to make cakes, we'd have a disaster on our hands. All right, so we need to use the right ingredient for the right job. All right, now what's also interesting about these flours is, to the naked eye, they're all the same. But when you look at them all next to each other, they actually look different. All right, the higher the protein amount in the flour, it has a tendency to have almost kind of a more off-whitish or like very faint tan color to it. All right, and the lesser protein and the more starch into it, it has a whiter color to it. All right, and then also its consistencies. All right, how does it feel? What does it look like? All right, those are also very, very strong indicators of what type of flour it is. All right, I'm going to show you a test that my mentor taught me when I was learning how to bake back in the day. All right, and he used to tell us, guys, you don't need a bag or a label to tell you what type of flour it is. What you need to know is its touch and its feel and its look. All right, and as long as you know that, you can identify what type of flour it is. All right, so I'm going to show you a little trick. This is the high gluten flour. The high gluten flour is the most fine, and it's the most powdery. All right, you can see that. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to throw the high gluten flour against the bench, and I'm going to look to see how it responds. All right. You see how it's very fine and wispy? All right. It didn't clump as much. Now, that high gluten flour next to the bread flour. The bread flour is almost a little lighter in color. So if they're right next to one another, I can tell which one's bread, which one's high gluten just by looking at it. But I can also do my throw test. The bread flour now. Okay? You see how there's larger clumps here? All right, larger clumps. It didn't spread out as fine as the high gluten. And if you want to see side by side, check it out. All right, this one is a lot less, it's a lot more dispersed and less isolated and clumpy. Now here's going to be the real kickers that you're going to notice a huge difference in. Now, going down in gradual in the gluten spectrum, this one here is the pastry flour, 7 to 9.5%. This one should be even more clumpy than the bread flour. It visually is, look at it, as opposed to, now let's see how it responds. All right. Larger, more defined clumps. Again, as opposed to, let's back up the truck, bread flour, less clumpy. Okay. Now, finally, cake flour. This one, look, see how it's almost like balls of flour in there? All right. And then we got this one here, which isn't as much. Watch the throw on this one. I could hear that hitting the bench like it was balls of something hitting the bench. All right? Because it's so much starchier, it's so much clumpier. All right? If we were to not sift that, we would have like little nasty dry flour balls all through whatever it was that we were baking. And that's bad. Pastry flour side by side. All right, a lot more wispy. A lot more wispy. So now that I've made a floury mess of myself, we're going to go back and take a look at our mixer here, where our dough has come together. All right. In the world of baking, we don't call this part of the process "quote unquote" mixing. It's bringing the dough together or hydrating it. Now, hydration continues to happen throughout the mixing process, but this is the initial hydration of the dough. All right, we're going to go down and take a look at it, and then we're going to set it to speed 2, which is kind of like your medium agitation. And we're going to let this dough mix and develop for 10 minutes. All right, in that 10-minute process, the protein in the flour, those strands of gluten, are going to get banged against the side of that bowl. That hook's going to mix it around, and it's going to cause friction. All right, so it's going to take it and pull and stretch, pull and stretch, pull and stretch, and it's going to make that gluten even stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger. All right, if it's a protein, I want you to think if you were like in Coach Ramos' strength class. All right, you're working out, and the more you develop your muscles, the more you work them, they get stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger. All right, maybe I should go to Coach's class because I am not as strong as I was 20 years ago. All right, so you can see the dough down there. All right, it's clearly a dough. All right, it's all in there. But look and see the inside of the bowl is all clean. All right, there's like, wow, there's no like clumps on there. There's no lumps or random schmegma or little hunks of flour or yeast. That's a well-hydrated and developed dough so far. All right, or at least a well-brought together dough. All right, so we're going to turn it back on. We're going to do speed 2. There's only 3 speeds on the big mixer. And we're going to set it for 10 minutes. Speed 2. And away she goes. All right, gang, we got something we don't want. in the bread baking world, it's what we call a hitchhiker, all right? Somebody who's along for a free ride, all right? A hitchhiker is when the dough climbs up onto the attachment and it just kind of spins around and goes for a ride without actually doing any work, all right? Or actually not paying any dues, contributing no merit. It's kind of like a hitchhiker, all right? They're just thumbing along and want a free ride, all right? This dough is not along for a free ride, so we're going to use our hefty, trusty bowl scraper and scrape it down so it's actually coming in contact with the side of that bowl, creating that friction that we want to develop that dough. As you can see, it is riding high up on the hook. I'll knock it down. All right, so dough's all mixed. It's looking good, all right? I'm going to show you a little hunk of it, and we're going to take a look at it, all right? See how stringy that is? See that? See that? That dough would not hold up to that and stay that stringy if it wasn't properly developed or if it was used with a flour of lesser protein or gluten content. All right, so we have gotten the results that we desire here. All right, this dough is stiff, yet it's also still quite squishy. Okay, see, it's even a little sticky, which is good. That's okay, but it's not like batter sticky where it gets all over me, all right? You see how it appears kind of sticky here? But when I put it against my hand, it doesn't stick, okay? I'm gonna use my trusty bowl scraper to scoop all the dough out. All right, so now you can see we got a nice good size ball of dough here. Now we need to cut and portion these, all right? So we're gonna cut and portion them into about 8-ounce pieces, and then I'm gonna show you how we shape them. Scale right here. Just like we've used in class, we're gonna set it to ounces, and we're gonna use our bench scraper, all right? This is like a baker's knife. It's very rare that you see a baker use like a French knife or a chef's knife like we use for cutting vegetables, okay? And if they do use one, they're almost always use it at a level that would drive a, you know, your standard line cook absolutely crazy. Wow, chef's on the ball today. 7.9, 2 in a row. That's good enough. Oh, 8.3. We're going to trim a little off this one. .8's a hair big. 10.9, I'll take it. So you can see I'm almost cutting off strips and then cutting my strips into smaller squares. That way, so it's as close as it can be to my desired form. All right, I wouldn't cut it in this big, long, weird rope and then try and turn it into a small ball. If I cut it into an appropriate size square, it's going to be a lot quicker and easier for me to shape it to where I want. 8 on the money. You can see, too, this dough is really nice and smooth, okay? All right, it has a nice smooth look to it. Its texture is very smooth to the touch. 8 on the money. 8 on the money. That's 8.9. Way too big. $8 on the money. And we're doing out quite well here. don't know about y'all, but I was some happy it finally snowed this weekend, all right? For those of you who don't know, I enjoy riding my snowmobile, and we haven't had enough yet, but I was able to drive it up to Errol, way up in the northern part of the state, and ride all afternoon yesterday afternoon, and it was glorious. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 19 portions of dough. There's, let's see here, 1, 2, 4, 10, 11, 13 of you. One of me is 14. And then we're going to have, I don't know, 4 or 5 extras in case somebody makes a mistake. Or maybe we'll invite Mr. Scott, Mr. Hess, and Ms. Ainsworth down for lunch. All right? They love to come down and see what students are doing, and they always appreciate a nice meal. Okay, so now we take this, and we're not even going to like knead it on the bench at all. It's been mixed plenty. But what we're going to do is use our hands and kind of tuck in the ends underneath. You see what I'm doing here? I can already feel this dough kind of popping, and that popping noise is the yeast going to work. Okay? Now, once that yeast has now been activated and it becomes activated, all right, and it starts to come alive when it comes into the presence of the liquid, all right, whether it's milk, whether it's water, all right, it could be any type of liquid. But once it comes into contact with that liquid, it comes alive and it gets to work, all right? And like we talked about the other day, all right, yeast feeds off of sugars. Not only the sugar that's in the dough, but also the natural carbohydrates in the flour, all right? That provides its fuel, that's its energy, that's what it's looking to eat to produce its gas, which is going to make the dough rise and give it its bubbles, okay? And if we recall, the salt is what kind of balances and tethers the growth of the yeast so it doesn't eat everything up and kill itself, all right? We want to keep that yeast alive, so what it can continue to do is slowly feed and do what we call ferment, all right? So as it's fermenting, fermentation adds a lot of flavor to great breads, okay? Any type of a sourdough bread or a baguette or like a crusty Italian bread, all right, if it kind of has like that little bit of something to it, all right, where it just kind of seems like, wait a second, this isn't a loaf of sandwich bread. This isn't like, you know, the little King's Hawaiian roll or a muffin that isn't even leavened with yeast. All right, that's the presence of the fermentation. All right, the more robust and rich the fermentation, the more robust and rich the flavor of the dough is going to be. All right, shaped. I'm placing these over in these plastic containers, okay? And I'm spreading the doughs out so when they grow up, all right, they don't like stick into one another. Pizzerias use a tray that's kind of similar in size but a little more shallow. All right, you may see them kind of stacked up at the back. All right. All right, so we got our first tray almost done. I'm going to hold this dough ball up, and you're going to see, if you look real close as it kind of dials in, you can see some pockets and some bubbles here. All right, see that bubble? All right, that is the yeast going to work. The fermentation is happening. It's producing the carbon dioxide that's going to allow this dough to grow, all right, and develop the flavor that we want, okay? So, first tray, well spaced out. Put a lid on this. Get our next tray ready. All right, and now I'm going to kind of go into production mode here. Okay, good to go. All right, so I'm going to pop these in the refrigerator, and we're going to allow the yeast to do its nice slow magic overnight, all right? And if I look at the time, it's 20 past 2 right now. So we're going to be getting after these in about 22 hours, all right? So kind of look at the size of them now. And then when you see them, when you get into class, they're going to be significantly bigger, all right? So hope you guys enjoyed. That's how we mix, shape, and prepare dough that we can use for pizzas, calzones, and for us tomorrow, strombolis. All right, guys, have a great afternoon. I'm going to see you tomorrow afternoon. Peace.